Hello and welcome back to the next video, and we want to continue our journey through the time intelligence functions in DAX which are available for us, which we can leverage in our Power BI reports. And this time we learn about the parallel period function, how it works and what it does for you. So let's actually, at first let me create a new page here, and then I'd like to see my dates table. I'm using my hierarchy, so I'm clicking on the date here, and then next to it I want to see a measure, and in my case I'm going with the total sales. So I click on my total sales, and then I switch it from the bar chart, which is by default here, because I selected the date first, to a table. So because, as I mentioned before, I think with the tables you see the best how it works. So I remove the day, and I also remove the quarter from the hierarchy, because we actually only need the year and the month for this. So then I also increase the size, so I go on a format option here, and I go to my value section, and the values allow us to increase the size of the values inside the table. So let's go with 15 and check that out. So I think that's big enough, hopefully on your screen as well. Now what we see is, we see here our total sales, the measure we have created before, and we can see the split based on a month-year combination, which we see here. So this is the filter context, we already know that. And that is why we get the correct number of total sales for each year-month combination, and of course at the total row we get the total amount of sales. So far so good. Now, we already learned about the same period last year function as well as the date add function, which in my case, or what I would consider it as a more flexible way to the same period last year function, depending on what you want. So if you want to jump back 1 month, 1 quarter, or 1 year, or several years, right? Also possible for the date add function. But now, let's actually explore another function, the parallel period function. So in order to do this, I right-click on the measures table here, and then I say I'd like to create a new measure. So tick it. And then just a second, here we go, there's the measure. Of course I want to increase the size so you can see that better on your screens. So here we go, the measure, and we call this is a parallel period sales, okay? That's what I name it. Of course you can adjust the name whatever you want. So equals, and then I say I want to calculate. Again, we want to modify the filter context that already tells us we need to use the calculate function. So let's calculate something. The expression itself will be our measure, which is the total sales. So total sales, that's what I use. Of course you could also do the same trick for the total cost as well as for the total profit if you want, or any other kind of measure you have. Now we have the expression itself, and now we need to give it a filter context. And here we want to refer to a time intelligence function, which is so-called parallel period. Here it is. And if you tap it, that's a great thing, at least from my point of view, you always get a little description of what this function does. Now I know that sometimes the description is a little bit cryptical, so it's difficult to understand. Then you simply have to try it out, but sometimes it's really useful. And here, the parallel period returns a parallel period of dates by the given set of dates and a specified interval. Okay, let's actually check that out. Now, the date itself, remember then, whenever you use time intelligence, in let's say 99% of the cases, you want to refer to your dates table and the continuous date column. So you simply can type in date, and from the dates table, the date column. Here we go. I select it with the mouse keyboard, and then I press tab to put it in the formula. Then the number of intervals, let's specify something. Let's say, for instance, -1, and then an interval itself. And it's kind of similar to what we had with the date add function. Here we are flexible. We could either say month, quarter, or year. So let's actually check out year. Let me select year. Then I close the parenthesis of the parallel period, and then of course I also need to close my calculate function. So we already know that with this function and the calculate, we change the filter context based on a new time intelligence function, which in our case is the parallel period function. And we want to change it by 1 year. So how is that different from the date add function? Let's check that out. Let's actually enter just to create the measure. Just a second, and here we go, there it is. And now we can use it in our reports. Now if I tick my table again, let me actually first untick it so I can't see I want to get rid of the bar. So the formula bar. So then I tick my table again, and this time I'm going with the parallel period. But before I do that, let me actually click it, and let's actually format this, right? Let's do the same as here. We click on the dollar symbol just to have the same format as the total sales in here. Okay, so now I'd like to edit. So you can either drag it and drop it in here, or you simply click on the little icon itself. Here, like that. Also works. Both the same. So you add it to the visual, and you can see that now you see a huge number. And by the way, I currently see it's a lot of decimal places, so let's actually check that one more time and set this not to auto, set it to 2 in my case. I press enter, and then I should see only 2 decimal numbers, so that's much better for me. So what we see is here in the new year in 2020, we saw 260,265. And this is the same value which gets repeated for all the other months in 2020 up to the end, to December. And then here in January, it starts with a new value, which is 652,000 and so on. And this value again gets repeated to the end, right? May actually is the last date, and then of course here for the rest of the year, of course we don't have any sales anymore, but we can still see the same value for the rest of the year. So what is this value? Now, if you maybe remember it, otherwise, let's actually check that out from the page number 1. In 2020, we can see 260,265, right? So if we go back to page number 1, what is this 260,000? Well, it is, if you take a look at this column here, it is exactly the total amount of sales in the financial year 2019. And the 652,000, which we saw in 2021, is exactly the number from the year 2020. So what this parallel period actually does, it is simply returning the total amount of sales from the prior period, in this case here for the whole year. The reason why it's specifying the whole year is because we did that in the parallel period function itself. So here we said we want to have the parallel period sales, so basically the complete dates table from a parallel period shifted by 1 year. And that is why it simply returns, for 2020 for instance, the complete dates table from 2019. And there's the sales data we have, because based on this table we get, we want to calculate our total sales. That is why this function works the way it does. Now of course, because we have a third argument here, which is this one, this is dynamic, right? So we can change it to quarter and so on. And by the way, of course, the -1 could also be changed, right? It's also possible. So for instance, let's try out the quarter, right? So type in quarter here, quarter. And then if I press enter, we will see that now we get the total quarter sum. So if I untick this, what you basically see here for October, November, and December, you can see the same value repeating for those 3 months. And then of course in January, then the next for these 3 months, the same value. And basically this 99,739 is simply the sum of those 3 months, so of the prior quarter, because we jump back 1 quarter. If you would go back to the parallel period function and say you want to jump back 2 quarters, for instance, like put in not 21 but 2, and press enter, what you see is basically still the sum of 99,739, but of course now shifted by 2 quarters. So this value is now the sum of these 3 months, so the prior quarter or 2 quarters ago, right? And the same is then true for 160. This is actually the sum of September, November, and December. So, sorry, October, November, December. Here we go. These 3 values, right? This is the 160,522. So this is what the parallel period function basically does. So it's shifting, or it's giving you a dates table. It returns a dates table shifted by a specific value we give it, like -1, -2, and so on, and by the interval we specify. So it's kind of similar to the date_add function, but in another case, in another context, because it returns the complete interval. So not only maybe 1 month back, but simply the complete 3 quarters, so a range of values. So it's it has a little different use case, but you could use it, right? Because now, for instance, you could figure out, if we go back to the, let's say, parallel period and say -1 for the quarter, then what we could do now, by simply creating this kind of formulas, so the total sales as well as the parallel period, we could now figure out, okay, in the prior quarter, we generated 99,739 in sales. Now, in the first month of the new quarter, let's say we are currently in October 2019, we generated 46,917. Now, you simply could divide those 2 values, and then you would know, okay, in the current quarter, we already have generated X% of our total sales in the prior quarter. So if this is a question or use case you want to ask yourself, then the parallel period function could be very helpful, because you can simply now divide the total sales by this value, and you can get the percentage number, right? So this is just one example. Maybe you have other examples in mind, but I just wanted to give you this formula because I think it's really, really helpful oftentimes, and not all people know about it. So now you know it, you can add it to your toolbox, and yeah, hopefully you play around with it, learn it, and apply it. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.